It's another beautiful Tuesday morning, everybody. Welcome back to Breakfast with Bill. And we're kicking it old school today because it's just me and Bill. I think we might get some breakfast in here. Bill, today we're talking all about negotiation. And since Matt's not here, you put me on the spot. And I wanted to just share with you that there's a line that you've used in your sales before that's actually been very helpful to me in my business when you're negotiating. And I just wanted to see if we could expand on that a little bit.
Sure.
Because one of the things I've always had problems with is pricing. You never know when you're talking to somebody what their budget is, especially in my industry. Sometimes I work with small businesses, large businesses. I don't know what kind of money they're thinking about throwing at a social media campaign or a video. And you use a line, you go, well, why don't you tell me what your budget is? And it turns into this game of chicken every time. You know, somebody wants to throw out a number. And you use this line, you say, well, I don't want to bring a $10,000 solution to a $5,000 problem or a $2,000 problem. And it works so well. And I'm just curious where you learned that from, and if you could expand on like how you came up with that.
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome back. I apologize for going back and forth between reading glasses, but I'm at that point in my life. It's horrifying. And Evan, what you're speaking of, I'm not really sure where it came from. I don't know where we found that. I don't know how I started doing that, but it is the magic of that. Saying, hey, I don't want to bring a $100,000 solution to a $20,000 problem, is helping people define scope, because it really focuses thought, right? So it helps people understand and focus their thought and narrow in their thought on, because how often do you say that? And I know in my case where I've said, we don't want to bring a $200,000 solution to a $50,000 problem. People are like, $200,000? There's no way I can pay. I understand. That's why I'm saying, let's manage the scope, right?
Right.
And they're like, oh, okay, yeah. Like 50 feels right, 50 to 60. Great, let's work with that, and we could back into a scope. Because, there are a lot of situations where, depending on the nature of your product or service, it can be very large, right? Or it could be more narrow and focused. And it's our job as the negotiator, our job as the solution provider, our job as that great detective, which is what really good salespeople are, great detectives. That's where it becomes our job to help narrow that thought and focus that thought. On that end, oftentimes as salespeople, we think the greatest currency we have, and this is one of something I learned from Matt, who I hope is feeling better today. Matt's home today. Not feeling well. There's a little bug making its way through the Rogers house, I think. So, one of the things I've learned from Matt is he likes to say, salespeople think speed is our greatest currency, but it's actually questions. Questions are our greatest currency, and that's so true. And you think about, what does that mean? If you were to go out into the world and say, what makes a great negotiator? What makes a great salesperson? What other profession has the skills that would best translate into being a great sales pro? And it's a detective, not a newscaster, right? Because too often people think the newscaster that's slick talking and has all the words, that's what you want. No, it's the detective that's just trying to stumble upon the truth and stumble upon the real issues. So that's where we want to see ourselves. So thanks for sharing that, Evan. I'm glad that's helped you, and it's something that I think might help people as you are struggling, because getting budget out of somebody is very difficult. And I don't think it's always that important, right? Because there are things we sell that budget is critical for. Like somebody might just say, hey, I have $1,000 a month, or I have, $5,000 a month that's going to go towards this. That's usually a commodity service. It could be phones, it could be copiers,
right.
It could be whatever. It's commodity services that people think they know what they should cost. But as soon as we break the commodity cycle and start getting people connected to results versus the item, we can start to expand budget. So budget's not as important as understanding what somebody's really prepared to maybe invest if they see it as an investment.
Have you ever seen the movie War Dogs?
No.
So it's like a comedy movie. It's about this guy. It's based on a true story. And I think it was like after 9/11, the federal government really ramped up their RFPs, and anybody could respond to them.
Yep.
And this crazy young guy in his 20s starts becoming an arms dealer. And he's buying these, weapons from all over the world, and he's selling them back to the federal government. And there's a really hilarious scene in the movie where him and his buddy get this massive contract with the Pentagon, and they're so fired up, and they're sitting there, and they're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as the contract's coming over, and they're signing the document. And the general looks at him, and he goes, yeah, he's like, we really, it was a no-brainer to go with you guys. And they're like, oh, really? Why? And he's like, you guys came in $98.5 million cheaper than the next closest deal. And they're like, oh, really? Is that how we came in? So it's just funny. Like, for me, I always think of that scene because it does seem like when, especially for me in my experience, not nearly as, gray-haired as you, but it does turn into a game of chicken where it's hard sometimes to get that number out of people, especially when, like you said, they don't. If it's something that's based on the growth that you're going to provide them, or maybe even savings you're going to provide them, they might not even know where to start with that, right?
Correct. And thank you for referencing my gray hair. Most people focus on my no hair, but it is difficult, and when we guess like that, it's not good because we can position ourselves as not being even reputable if that number comes in too low, and we also can miss total scope from somebody, which is why it's so important to define scope before we define price, right? So with that, let's talk about today some more of the fundamentals of negotiation as we kind of wrap up our 3-part series here on negotiations. One of the things that we need to always be mindful of is setting the tone. So when we open up our negotiation, we set the tone of the negotiation, which doesn't mean it has to be difficult. Sometimes it's going to be, hey, I'm not even here to negotiate. I'm just here to help. And, yesterday my middle daughter, Gina, was unfortunately in a car accident. And the people that hit her, bad situation, not really having full insurance and, young family, just bad, right? All around bad. And we don't want to get them really jammed up. And I called them last night to talk about what we're going to do. And I opened the negotiation by saying, hey, we want to help you. We don't want to put you in a bad place. We don't want you guys to be hurt. And it allows us to have a very open, honest conversation where nobody feels like they have to hold information back. Right? And when we set the tone of the negotiation, it doesn't have to be combative. It just has to be setting our calm and letting somebody know we're coming at this rationally, which in most cases will help them come at this rationally. It allows them to come at this with a little more openness, where they don't feel like they have to be so defensive, and we end up getting more honest feedback, which is ultimately what we want. And as always, for those of you joining us on various social media platforms, please enter any questions you have. Happy to take questions today, and happy to take questions between now and next week. If you'd like to submit those to evan@telericogroup.com, evan@telericogroup.com for questions between now and next week, be it on selling, hiring, or leadership. And if you have any questions today on negotiation, please put those in the chat box, and we'll be sure to get to those. So, one of the first things to remember, again, from a foundation or fundamental, is setting the tone, letting somebody know that we're here to get to a good outcome, a mutually beneficial outcome, and let's figure out a couple of the areas that are still open for us to get there. And it opens up the conversation to be more natural, to be more transparent, and to be more sharing versus guarded and combative. The other thing that is kind of critical when we go into negotiations is, what's our mindset, right? What is our mindset? And why do most people hate negotiations? Evan, if you had to guess, why do you think most people hate going into negotiations?
Well, for me, it's just, I feel like I'm going to get embarrassed. I'm either going to ask for more and they're going to think I'm, a greedy guy, or I'm going to go way under and I'm going to have that war dog scenario where I'm overworked and not compensated fairly. So right. I just think it's going to be bad in either direction.
Yeah. And part of that mindset comes from the friction of the negotiation, right? So most people hate negotiations because of the friction that they perceive happening in the negotiation. We can eliminate some of that fear and frustration by focusing on the outcome. So when we go into the negotiation, see the end, see the outcome. Don't focus on the friction that comes from you versus me. Don't focus on the friction of trying to go through the process. See the outcome, right? And then that friction along the way just becomes the beautiful highway scenery on our journey. As we're going through that, we can start to appreciate and see, oh, this is a moment we're going to laugh about later when we see that outcome. And and this also allows us to stay more in the moment, right? Because in the moment, we're focused on getting to that good outcome, not getting waylaid along the way, which means we have to, third point, not be so focused on winning at every point of the conversation, right? We don't always have to be in the winner's position. We don't always have to be ahead. There's moments that we might want to actually fall back and let somebody advance an idea they think they have in a negotiation that's in their benefit. So we can just ask questions and poke holes in that to help them see that maybe it's not relevant, maybe it's not pertinent, maybe it's not needed. So remember that we don't have to always be ahead. We just want to keep the momentum going, the good, honest, open conversation while we're focused on the outcome. And then start to ask questions, right? Ask questions along the way because they're our greatest currency. Some of the questions we might want to be asking is if we seem stuck, which we will all be in a negotiation that seems stuck. And we won't be able to put our finger on the why, right? But we know that the party on the other side of the table from us, they're kind of in that inertia phase. They don't know what to do next. And that's where questions become so valuable for us, where we can ask questions like, well, let me ask you a question. What's the one thing that has you most concerned about our plan? What's the one thing that has you most concerned about our product? What's the one thing that has you most concerned about our approach? Whatever that might be, we focus thought with our one thing questions. So when we're stuck, when people are in an inertia phase, when they're not able to move forward and actually see the outcomes that we see, we refocus thought by asking those one thing questions. It'll help you move off stuck, right? Nothing will help you move off stuck more because everyone will have an answer to a one thing question. Make sense, Evan?
Makes sense to me.
All right. So let's keep going. Another thing from a foundation or fundamental piece as we're moving through this is don't get upset by assertions that don't really make sense, or don't get upset by assertions that you disagree with. Because in that negotiation, somebody's going to say something that you disagree with. And if we lock in on that thing, if we lock in on that, well, no, that's wrong, and we get out of the moment, that's where we lose our focus, and that's where we become less effective. Don't do that. Stay in the moment. Let them say something. Say, okay, well, how does that apply here? Or I'm not sure how I would use that, or how we would use that information. And make them to defend the indefensible. I always say that, when we're in negotiations, whether it's with employees, happens a lot with employees, or outside commercial partners, when we get stuck arguing something that's indefensible, we look like the fool, and that's crazy making behavior. So don't get pulled down that road. If somebody's saying something that you know is wrong, say, okay, well, how's that work? Right? And just let them defend the indefensible. And you'll find that you have much lower frustration and much better results. And then finally, we get to a point in a negotiation where things might seem all hammered out. We have to recap, right? So that's where we would say, okay, great. Sounds like we're going to do this, this, and this, and it's going to cost this. And they say, yeah, great. And say, okay, so what makes sense from here? That's the easiest way to wrap up a negotiation is we recap what's been shared with us. We recap the information that we've agreed to at this point, and then we start planning how we move forward. One of the ways I love to do that is say, okay, what makes sense from here? And people hear the question on their mind. They'll hear what makes sense from a process standpoint, what makes sense from an execution standpoint, who's the one person you have to call, whatever it might be. Say, what makes sense from here? And somebody will lay out for us, why don't we get started August 1st? Okay, great. What do you think we should do, Evan, if somebody says, let's get started August 1st, and here we sit on July 13th? What's a question we might want to ask? I hate putting you on the spot like this.
Yeah, wow, you're really challenging me. If they want to do something on August 1st.
Here's a hint. It's a one-thing question we should be asking.
I would say, I don't know. I'm stumped, honestly.
What's the one thing that would get in the way?
Yeah, well, I guess that's a great.
What's the one thing that's going to get in the way from us kicking off August 1st?
Right, because there's enough time there. What is it, 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks? There's enough time for things to change between now and then.
And that's actually a tight timeline, right? That's a tight timeline. So maybe what makes sense from here, what's the one thing that could get in the way? Then we start to actually set up our timelines with commitments. and setting some clear next steps. So, just because somebody said sounds great, the difficult part is really coming into execution. So the negotiation is just part of the challenge of winning. The negotiation gets us to a place of mutually beneficial outcomes, but we're not done because we have to stay focused on how do we move into execution phase. And that is when we really conclude or wrap up the negotiation. It's not good enough to have somebody agree to something that we never execute on. That's not mutually beneficial for them or us, right? It's not mutually beneficial if we just had a great conversation, but we're not able to help them. We're not able to deliver a solution, and in turn, they're not able to compensate us. So that's where we want to get to. That's the goal of the negotiation. Remember that. It's the goal of the negotiation for us to be providing goods and services that are of value to them, and them to be compensating us fairly for that which we deliver. So, that's it. That's our wrap up of fundamentals on negotiation. We ask that you please share any questions you have about this in the chat. Share them with us on LinkedIn if you'd like over between now and next Tuesday, and we'll be able to address those with some more intentionality. Evan, what's happening on your side?
Well, I just have actually one more question for you before the real wrap up. Once you get through the negotiation process or that initial negotiation process, and now you're delivering the service, and I know you and Matt might have touched on this a little bit, and you start to see a little bit of scope creep, and things are changing, and maybe you're doing things that weren't quite in that initial negotiation. What's the best way to bring that up with the client? Because now you're all of a sudden thrown back into the negotiation. Like, how would you bring that up with them in a polite manner?
Yeah, well, the first thing to determine, and this is why when we do have the negotiation, I failed to say this earlier, but, we document those agreed upon things, right? We document those things, put them in a scope, SOW, statement of work, get it over to the client, share it, they sign it, we sign it, whatever. And we have, and if you're not into signatures, like sometimes we're not, at least have a document that's, even if it's an email, that becomes our guiding document of the things we'll do. And then if we see the creep, it's our job to bring it up to them, because it might be creep that's not valuable, right? So you have two creeps, right? The one creep, scope creep, is that creep that's not really valuable to them. It's just a matter of people getting lazy or things, falling into whatever. It might be something that's, sleeves out of our vest value that we can offer without any real cost to us. If that's the case, we want to bring it up to them and say, hey, so, a little bit outside of scope here, but that seems like it's important to you. And if they say, well, yeah, that's actually been very helpful. So they said, we're fine. If there's no cost to it, no real cost to you, and it's just something that makes the relationship better, great. If there's scope creep there that does have a cost associated with it, the best way to handle that is just being honest, right? It's never wrong to do the right thing. It's never wrong to be truthful. And when we share that with somebody and say, hey, happy to do this, but just so you know, when we do that, it increases our time or increases our cost, increases whatever. Is that valuable enough for you to pay another blank? $500 a month, $1,000 a month, whatever it might be. And if somebody's like, nah, it really isn't, say, okay, well, how can we work around it? Right? And just have that honest discussion. And again, lean on questions. Give people information they need to make a good decision, and then lean on questions for how they want to handle it.
Yeah, I feel like just being open and honest goes a long way with a lot of these things, right? Sometimes it's the fear of not wanting to ask the question. You're like, oh, man, this person's going to be upset. And then you finally come out and say it, and they're like, oh, yeah, no worries. You would need an extra $1,000, whatever you need. And then it's like, why was I even worried about it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that those things are usually much heavier on our hearts than they are on our lips. And when we carry those things and we're afraid to share them with people, we build that fear up ourselves. And most people, they get it. They're open, they're honest. Yeah, that's fine. Most people are good people. When you share something with someone and they push back and are like, no, I can't believe you'd bring that up for me or to me, you might want to reevaluate whether they're a good customer or not, right? Because I think that there's plenty of work out there for us, no matter what we're doing. There's plenty of work out there for us. And Evan, better than most that last year we treated people right. when they were at difficult times, and they've been treating us right ever since. So there's plenty of work out there for you to surround yourself with good people. You don't have to chase people that make your business difficult.
Right.
If you're waking up in the morning and you're dreading talking to a client or a customer, they're probably the wrong client or customer for you.
Yeah, and it all circles back to the negotiation. You've got more leverage in your negotiation if you're not desperate. So
financially independent mindset, right?
Yeah.
So when you can go into those negotiations and think, I want something good, right? Mutually beneficial outcomes. I want somebody that's good for my business, that I know I can help their business. That's great. When you go into every opportunity thinking you have to win it because you're desperate, number one, people smell desperation. They smell it like it's a pervasive odor that they smell instantly, and they'll take advantage of it, and we act differently. So don't go into these conversations, don't go into negotiations being desperate. So cool. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you being my co-pilot here today, throwing some softballs my way and having some thought-provoking conversation and questions to me. For all of you who join us, again, we're so grateful for your participation, and we're so grateful for the trust you put in us and the time you invest in us every week. So thank you for that. Hope you guys have a great week. Please don't hesitate to send questions our way, be they either on LinkedIn or social media platforms, or to evan@telericogroup.com, evan@telericogroup.com. Thank you all. Have a great week, and God bless.